He was worth more than $11 billion. He owned 3 private jets, a house on the coast of California, another one in Colorado, hidden in the mountains where no camera could find him. His name was on buildings in 6 states. Business magazines called him the man who could not fail. But for 30 years, he refused to answer one question. Just one. Reporters asked him again and again. Podcast hosts begged him on camera. His own children asked him at the dinner table. And every single time, he smiled, changed the subject, and walked away. The question was simple. What really happened to you before you became rich? Because here is the truth nobody knew. Before the billions. Before the mansions. Before his name was on any building at all, this man slept in the back seat of a broken-down car in a parking lot in Ohio. He had $11 in his pocket. He had no family speaking to him. And he had, in his own words, already given up on life. So what changed? What turned a broke, forgotten man into one of the wealthiest people in the United States? For 3 decades, he never told anyone. Until one night, in a quiet interview that almost nobody was watching, he finally opened up. He looked directly into the camera and said, "I think it's time I tell the truth. All of it." What he said next shocked everyone who heard it. It wasn't about luck. It wasn't about a genius idea. It wasn't even about money. It was about something far more painful. And far more human. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what he meant, and you might just see your own life a little differently. This is the real story of an ordinary American man who became a billionaire, and the truth he hid for 30 years. Before we get into his story, let's talk about something important. Something that affects almost everyone watching this video right now. We live in a world obsessed with billionaires. We see their yachts on Instagram. We see their private jets on YouTube. We watch interviews where they talk about waking up at 4 a.m. and never giving up. And most of us walk away from those videos feeling one of 2 things. Either we feel inspired for about 10 minutes, and then we forget everything by the next morning. Or honestly, we feel worse. We compare our small apartment to their mansion. We compare our slow, boring job to their private company. We think, maybe some people are just born lucky. Maybe it's not for people like me. That second feeling, that quiet belief that success is only for special people, is one of the most dangerous thoughts a person can carry. Because it is almost never true. And this story is proof of that. The man in this video was not born into money. He was not born with connections. He did not go to an expensive university. In fact, for the first 32 years of his life, almost everything about his story looked like failure. He grew up in a small town in the state of Ohio, in a house that, in his own words, always smelled like stress. His father worked at a factory that eventually shut down. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There were nights, more than he liked to admit, when dinner was simply bread and butter, split between him and his younger sister. He was not the smartest kid in his class. He was not the most popular. Teachers described him as distracted and not focused. Nobody in that classroom, not even the boy himself, believed he was destined for anything extraordinary. And here is the real problem this video wants to address. Most people believe that success stories like his are built on one big lucky break. One genius idea. One perfect moment. But that is not what actually happened. What actually happened was messier, slower, and much more painful than any highlight reel could ever show. And understanding the real process, not the fairy tale version, is the only way any of us can actually learn something useful from a story like this. So before we go further, ask yourself something. How many times in your own life have you looked at someone successful and thought, they just got lucky? And how many times has that thought quietly stopped you from trying something yourself? Keep that question in your mind. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why that thought is almost always wrong. This video is not just a story about money. It is a story about 5 things that repeat again and again in almost every real self-made success story in America. Whether the person ends up a billionaire, a small business owner, or simply someone who finally turns their life around. Those 5 things are struggle, failure, a turning point, discipline, and truth. Let's break each one down quickly, because you're going to see all 5 of them play out in his story. Struggle is where almost every real story begins. Not comfort. Not privilege. Struggle. Whether it's poverty, sickness, a broken family, or simply feeling stuck, struggle is the starting line, not the finish line. Failure comes next, and this is the part most people skip when they talk about success. This man did not succeed on his first try. He did not succeed on his second try either. In fact, before he became wealthy, he lost almost everything, twice. Then there is the turning point. This is the single moment, often very small and very quiet, where something shifts inside a person. It's rarely dramatic in the way movies show it. Sometimes it's just one sentence someone says to you. Sometimes it's hitting a point so low that you have nothing left to lose. After the turning point comes discipline, the boring, unglamorous, repeated action of doing the same hard work every single day, long after the excitement wears off. This is the part nobody wants to talk about because it isn't exciting content. But it's the actual engine behind almost every long-term success. And finally, there is truth, the moment, sometimes years or even decades later, when a person finally stops performing for the cameras and tells you what actually happened. This man's story has all 5. And by the time we reach the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the truth was that he hid for 30 years, and why he was so afraid to say it out loud. Let's begin his story from the very beginning. Chapter 1: The Boy from Ohio. His name, for the purpose of this story, was Daniel. Growing up, Daniel's family did not have much. His father, a proud but exhausted man, worked at a local manufacturing plant for almost 15 years before the factory closed its doors and moved operations overseas. Daniel was 14 years old when he watched his father come home that day, sit down at the kitchen table, and say nothing for almost an hour. That silence stuck with Daniel more than any lecture ever could have. His mother took on extra shifts at a diner just to cover rent. Daniel, being the oldest child, started working too, cutting neighbors' lawns, delivering newspapers before school, and later, working weekends at a hardware store once he turned 16. He was not a natural student. School bored him. Numbers on a whiteboard felt disconnected from the real problems he saw at home every single day. Bills piling up, a car that barely started in winter, a refrigerator that was often more empty than full. But there was one thing Daniel noticed about himself, even as a teenager. He was not afraid of hard work. He didn't love it, but he wasn't afraid of it either. While other kids his age complained about a 2-hour shift, Daniel would quietly ask his manager for extra hours. By 18, Daniel had saved a small amount of money, a few $1,000s from years of odd jobs. He didn't go to a 4-year university. Instead, he took a chance most people around him thought was reckless. He used almost all of his savings to start a small local business, delivering and installing home appliances for people in his town. It seemed like a small, unremarkable decision at the time. Nobody clapped. Nobody believed it would go anywhere. But it was the first domino in a very long chain of events. Chapter 2: The First Collapse. For about 2 years, Daniel's small delivery business grew steadily. He reinvested almost every dollar he earned. He upgraded his truck. He hired one part-time helper. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he was building something that was actually his. Then, at 21 years old, disaster hit. A larger regional company moved into his town, offering the same delivery and installation service for a fraction of the price Daniel charged. Within 4 months, Daniel lost almost 70% of his customers. He had already taken out a loan to buy a second truck, believing his growth would continue. Now he was stuck with debt, 2 vehicles he couldn't afford to maintain, and almost no customers left. Daniel did something many young business owners do in that situation. He panicked. He tried to cut prices to compete, which only drained what little profit remained. He tried borrowing more money to buy time, which only deepened the hole. Within 8 months, Daniel's small business collapsed completely. He was forced to sell both trucks at a loss, just to pay off part of his debt. At 22 years old, Daniel was broke, in debt, and living back in his childhood bedroom. Worse, his father, the same man who had once sat silently at that kitchen table, looked at him and said something Daniel never forgot. "Maybe this isn't for you, son." Those words hurt more than the debt ever did. Chapter 3: The Years Nobody Talks About. What happened between the ages of 22 and 29 is the part of Daniel's story that almost never appears in any magazine article about him. It's the part he avoided talking about for 30 years. Daniel took whatever work he could find. He worked as a delivery driver for a shipping company. He worked night shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store. For almost 2 years, he worked as a low-level salesman for an insurance company, a job he later described as the loneliest job I've ever had, because he was rejected by strangers almost every single day. During this period, Daniel attempted 2 more small business ideas. One was a small online store selling home goods, which failed within 6 months due to lack of capital and marketing knowledge. The other was a partnership with a childhood friend to open a small repair shop, which ended not because of the business itself, but because of a falling out between the 2 friends over money, a betrayal Daniel rarely spoke about publicly, even decades later. By the time Daniel turned 29, he had failed at 3 separate business attempts. He had almost no savings. His relationship with his father remained distant and cold. And on one particular night, the night he would later describe as the bottom, Daniel found himself sleeping in the back seat of his car in a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner in Columbus, Ohio, because he had fallen behind on rent and was too embarrassed to ask his parents for help again. He had $11 in his wallet that night. This was the moment, decades later, that reporters would ask him about again and again. And for 30 years he refused to answer. Chapter 4: The Turning Point. Here is where Daniel's story shifts, and it did not happen the way most people expect. There was no sudden lightning bolt idea. No mentor appearing out of nowhere with a check. What actually happened was much smaller, and much more human. The next morning, after that night in his car, Daniel walked into the same 24-hour diner outside which he had parked, simply to use the restroom and get a free cup of coffee refill. The diner's owner, an older woman named Ruth who had run the place for over 20 years, noticed him. She had seen him in the parking lot more than once that week. She didn't ask questions. She didn't give him a lecture. She simply asked, "You know how to fix things?" Daniel, confused, said yes, remembering his years working at the hardware store and doing appliance repairs. Ruth told him her kitchen equipment kept breaking down, and she couldn't afford to keep calling a repair company that charged too much. She offered him a deal, fix her equipment, and she'd feed him and pay him a little on the side. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a business breakthrough, in the way movies portray it. But it was work. And more importantly, it was the first time in years someone had trusted Daniel with responsibility instead of judging him for his failures. Daniel later said, in that rare interview, "Ruth didn't save me with money. She saved me by treating me like I was still capable of something." Over the next few months, word spread among other small local business owners that Daniel could fix almost anything: kitchen equipment, small machinery, electrical issues, for a fair price and without the wait time of bigger repair companies. Slowly, one small job led to another. Chapter 5: Building, Slowly and Quietly. This next part of Daniel's story is the part that actually explains his later success, and it is almost entirely about discipline, not luck. Daniel did not build a billion-dollar company overnight. For nearly 4 years, he simply worked as a reliable, honest repair technician for small businesses across his region. He built a reputation. He showed up on time. He didn't overcharge people. He fixed things properly the first time, even if it took him longer. Slowly, Daniel began to notice a pattern. Many of the small businesses he worked with struggled not just with broken equipment, but with unreliable suppliers and outdated systems in general. At 33 years old, Daniel used his savings, modest, but steady after years of consistent work, to start a small company that helped local businesses source affordable, reliable equipment, and offered maintenance contracts alongside it. This time, things were different. Daniel didn't expand recklessly like he had in his 20s. He grew slowly. He reinvested cautiously. He hired people he trusted, often those who, like him, had been overlooked or underestimated elsewhere. Over the next decade, that small regional company grew into a much larger operation, eventually expanding into equipment manufacturing and distribution across multiple states. By his mid-40s, Daniel's company had grown into a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By his early 50s, after a major expansion and a well-timed partnership within the logistics industry, Daniel's net worth crossed into the billions. From the outside, it looked like a clean, impressive rise. Business magazines wrote about the self-made billionaire from Ohio. They asked him about strategy, about leadership, about his secret formula for success. But Daniel always deflected the deeper questions, especially the question about that night in the parking lot. Chapter 6: The Cost of Success. Here is a part of Daniel's story that is just as important as his financial rise, because it explains exactly why he stayed silent for so long. Success did not fix everything in Daniel's life. His relationship with his father, who passed away when Daniel was 41, was never fully repaired. Daniel later admitted that even after becoming wealthy enough to buy his parents a new home, his father never once said the words, "I'm proud of you." Daniel carried that silence for the rest of his life. His marriage, which began in his early 30s during the difficult early years of building his company, ended in divorce when Daniel was 46. He later said that the same discipline and relentless focus that built his business also, quietly and without him realizing it, pulled him away from his family for years at a time. And there was the deeper wound, the memory of that parking lot, the $11, the humiliation of sleeping in his car. For 30 years, Daniel avoided that story publicly, not because he was ashamed of being poor, but because, in his own words, "I was afraid that if people saw how close I came to giving up completely, they'd stop seeing me as strong. I built my whole identity around never being that broken man again." This is the part of his story most people never hear. Because most interviews only want the highlight reel, the mansions, the growth charts, the success formula. They rarely ask about the years of quiet pain behind it. Chapter 7: The Night He Finally Told the Truth. By the age of 62, Daniel had built a business empire worth over $11 billion. He had every reason to keep telling the polished, comfortable version of his story that magazines loved. But something changed. A small independent podcast host, someone with a modest audience compared to major networks, reached out to Daniel's team for an interview. Most big-name shows wanted the success formula angle. This host, instead, simply asked to talk to Daniel as a person, not a case study. For reasons Daniel never fully explained, he said yes. About 40 minutes into that quiet, low-key conversation, the host gently asked him, "Is there anything about your journey you've never actually told anyone?" There was a long pause. Long enough that the host almost moved on to the next question. Then Daniel said, "Yeah, there is." He described, for the very first time publicly, that night in the parking lot outside the diner in Columbus. The $11. The silence from his father. The 3 failed businesses. The 2 years of quiet, humiliating survival jobs. And Ruth, the diner owner who gave a broken young man one small chance to be useful again. Then he said the words that later spread across social media and were quoted in dozens of articles. "Everyone wants to know my secret to becoming a billionaire. They think it's a strategy, or an investment, or some genius idea. The truth is much simpler and much harder to hear. The secret wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It was that I refused to stay down after failing 3 times in a row, at an age when everyone around me thought I should give up. That's it. That's the whole secret. Everything else, the company, the money, all of it, was just what happened after I decided to keep going one more time. He continued, visibly emotional. I hid this story for 30 years because I thought it made me look weak. Now I understand it's the only part of my story that actually matters. The company can be copied. The money can disappear. But the decision to get up after your 3rd failure, nobody can take that away from you, and nobody can copy it either. That short clip, just under 3 minutes long, was later viewed by millions of people online. Not because it revealed a business trick, but because it revealed something far rarer: total honesty from a man the public had only ever seen as a polished success story. So what can we actually take from Daniel's story? First, real success is almost never a straight line. Daniel failed at business 3 separate times before the 4th attempt slowly, quietly grew into something enormous. If you are currently in a season of failure, that does not mean you are finished. It might simply mean you haven't reached your 4th attempt yet. Second, the turning point is rarely dramatic. It wasn't a genius idea or a lucky investment that changed Daniel's life. It was one woman offering him a small, unglamorous chance to be useful again. Sometimes the beginning of a comeback looks incredibly small and unimportant in the moment. Third, discipline matters more than talent. Daniel was not the smartest person in his town. He was not the most naturally gifted. What separated him was his willingness to keep showing up, keep working honestly, and keep going after being knocked down again and again. Fourth, success does not erase pain. Even after becoming a billionaire, Daniel carried real wounds: a distant father, a broken marriage, 30 years of silence about his lowest moment. Wealth changed his bank account. It did not automatically heal his heart. That healing came later, through honesty. And finally, the truth is always more powerful than the performance. For 30 years, Daniel gave polished, comfortable answers in interviews. But the moment that actually moved millions of people wasn't a polished answer. It was the raw, honest truth about $11, a parking lot, and a woman named Ruth who saw worth in him when he couldn't see it in himself. Whatever situation you're in right now, whether you're facing your 1st failure or your 5th, Daniel's story is a reminder that the story isn't over yet. Sometimes the most important chapter of your life hasn't been written because you're standing right before your own turning point. So let's bring it all together. This was the true story of a man who grew up with almost nothing in a small town in Ohio, failed at business not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, and at his lowest point, found himself sleeping in his car with only $11 to his name. Through nothing but stubborn persistence, honest hard work, and one small act of kindness from a diner owner named Ruth, he slowly rebuilt his life from the ground up, eventually becoming a billionaire. But for 30 years, he hid the painful truth behind that success, afraid it made him look weak, until one honest conversation finally set that truth free. If there's one simple lesson to carry with you from this video, let it be this: your current failure is not your final chapter. Every person who ever built something meaningful had a version of that parking lot moment. A point where giving up would have been the easy, understandable choice. The ones who succeed aren't the ones who never fall down. They're simply the ones who keep getting back up, one more time than they wanted to. If this story inspired you today, I'd love for you to be part of this journey. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we share powerful, true stories just like this one every single week. Stories about real people who refused to give up, even when life gave them every reason to. Thank you for watching until the very end. Take care of yourself, keep going, and I'll see you in the next story.